So I don't know if you remember, I'm actually in Rob Bailey's CCV, Clear, Calculated, and Vicious group. He's been having me talk for like 5 or 10 minutes every day on Mondays whenever we have our calls. And he's like, "Hey man, quit giving me all the gloom, all the sad stuff. Like, give me some positivity." I'm like, "Man, look at the look at the world right now. Look at the country. It's insane. There's not a lot of positivity." So I kind of make stuff up at the end. I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is positive." So like I don't want to get too doom and gloom, but man, the market looks like it's it's posted up by the Magnificent Seven, Magnificent Eight, whatever you want to call it. I believe it's going to pop soon. So really, annuities have looked great right now. Fixed index annuities, SPIAs, MIGAs, all those good things. The problem is, as you know, on social media, everybody's talking about them because they pay well. Well,
Yeah.
people will take all of your assets and put it into annuities because one, it pays them well. Two, they're going to show you some kind of ridiculous rate of return. Um, Too good to be true type aspect, and most of the time it is. And I think the reason why is one, all these people are being trained by insurance companies. And of course, what are insurance companies doing? Looking out for the bottom line. How much money can we make? What makes the most amount of money? So we're going to teach people to sell the product that locks in the money the longest and pays the most commission to the agent, makes them happy, makes them sell more. And on top of that, you have all these MLMs. Man, every time I talk about MLM, I get blasted in my comments and in my messages. And I've actually got death threats talking about one company. So, anyways,
Just
they're
I'll
taught
do that,
also.
I'll do that for you.
That's it. All the three-letter agencies, and no, I'm not talking about FBI, CIA, but um, all those groups are being taught by people that make money off of what they sell. So, like, let's say you sell a product, and the agent, I'm the writing agent, I make 5%, and really the contract goes for 8%. So 2.5 goes to you. Let's say you're my boss, and then a 0.5% goes to the company. So of course they're going to say, hey, sell this product. It makes 10%. You'll make 5. I'll make 3. Company makes 2. So they're basically looking out for their own self interest. So what I kind of want to do here is let's just talk about what an annuity actually is. What's the definition? What types are there? What to look out for? Because we've seen some crazy stuff. And I know whenever we first started, we kind of fell into that trap because when you don't know anything, you look up to a mentor and you always just assume they're doing right by you, doing
Hmm.
right by the clients. They're going to teach you what you need to know. And most of the time, honestly, it's not the case. So, real
Yep.
quick, there are guaranteed annuities, there are income annuities, and then there are growth annuities. So, I'll go ahead and let you touch on all those topics right quick, and then I'll just kind of chime in as I can.
Yeah. Let me do this first because I think it gives some good context. I, funny enough, filmed a video about this yesterday. But my personal opinion, I could be wrong. I might get some backlash for this, is that MLMs should be for skincare, for proteins, for things like that that don't have to deal with people's financial livelihood.
Uh-huh.
The reason I say that is because I was in one for a period of time. And to share a story before I go into the annuities quickly, is what happens as you get into every MLM. How do you get business? You get recruited. They say, hey, let's go talk to all your warm market, because if you open a business, who do you want to know that you open a business? Your family and friends. You want to show them, you want to get their feedback. And trust me, I could go for years on all the language, right? You, anyways, if you open up a restaurant, you want people to come see the food, taste it, get your feedback, opinions, because they either might become a recurring customer or they give you referrals and tell someone else about it. We all know. Anyways, I digress. So what happens is when you are trained in these systems, a lot of times, and I'm not saying everyone, there's a lot of really good people out there in these companies that I know personally. But the generality that I've seen is that people are trained in a way, like Dustin said, that makes the agent, the agency, and the insurance company the most amount of money because their commission levels are so low. They have to do that to make a livelihood. So what I found out is as I start getting more educated in insurance, annuities, all these different things, is that there are certain ways that I wasn't comfortable doing my business, especially because we were going and talking to all my family and friends, which guess what? I just found out we basically like screwed all them over. Right. So that's where I came from. And I was not comfortable with that. So guess what? I started educating myself with outside people like Doug Andrews, McKnight. I went into the rabbit hole of all that because I wanted to make sure that the people I was writing up, which were my parents, my family, my aunts and uncles, I want to make sure they were taken care of. Because imagine them coming to you 20 years later and say, hey, I got no money in this. Like, what did you do to me? I personally can't sleep with that. So
Nope.
I left that company and I became independent, went to some different companies after that. But the reason I just share that is because that is, I think, a huge problem in the industry. It's not that insurance companies are evil. It's that agents necessarily don't know what they're marketing and they don't know what can happen. So they're unknowingly lying to their clients. And it's not really their fault because they were trained by their manager who was told a certain way. They were told a certain way, and they just are told not to ask questions, be coachable, right? We've heard that. So they either don't know what they're doing or they do know. Like this example, I had talked to a guy yesterday who has been in the industry 30 some years, with a company that has green and white lettering. Probably know what that is. It's another three-letter company, and was telling people that they would make 14% average inside their life insurance, which, as you know, if that was the case, that's higher than what the market does. That's really weird. So I give you that story because it's not that insurance companies, annuities are evil. It's that the agents who use these generally don't know what they're doing, or they do know what they're doing and they're lying to you. So neither of those is good. I digress. Going back to annuities, there's a couple different types. We talked about guaranteed annuities, fixed index annuities, variable annuities. The really one that we focus on a lot is different types of fixed index annuities, which all that means is you have a bucket of money. I give the analogy of if you're bowling, imagine you're bowling with the bumpers up. If you bowl with the bumpers down, you're going in the gutter sometimes, you miss some frames, you don't get pins. That's like having negative years in the market, because then you have to spend the next frames trying to get strikes and get home runs to make sure you're recovering for those bad frames. But imagine if you have the bumpers up, you're basically making sure that you always get something, whether it's like the roll-up rate or the interest in the market. That way you're always moving in a positive direction. So that's how fixed index annuities are, is just meaning that if you have a guarantee in your portfolio of a certain amount of income, a certain amount of interest, it takes stress off of the rest of your portfolio in terms of needing to perform. Because if you have a guarantee, then you can just let that money cook and keep doing its thing in the market and let the guarantees give you the guaranteed income that you need. So I really like the fixed index annuities, and we can kind of go over maybe the three kinds of fixed index that we've seen, of ones that are like a pension for the rest of your life with very low growth or almost no growth, very high income. There's hybrid ones, which give you good income and good growth, a little bit of both. And then the accumulation, which is really no guaranteed income, but gives you the highest growth, highest potential for, long-term growth in the market.
Right. Yeah. And real quick, whenever you hear the word annuity, you're probably thinking of grandpa's annuity, where an insurance company takes all your hard worked money, all you saved for 45 years. They take it, they give you guaranteed income when you die, whether it's tomorrow or in 20 years, they keep all your money. That's what we call a SPIA, or a single premium immediate annuity. And they're not all like that. That's just what people think of. The word annuity, if you define it, really is like an annual amount of income or an annual amount of interest credited. So if you're talking about a MIGA, a multi-year guaranteed annuity, that's the guaranteed annuities we're talking about. You can expect like CD-like returns. So if you put $1 million into a MIGA, and I have clients that want MIGAs because it's guaranteed, their old school way of thinking, I want a guaranteed rate of return. So that's $50,000 per year, every year, guaranteed as long as you're in the contract period. So let's say you do a 7-year MIGA. In those 7 years, they'll guarantee you 5%. Now, when that 5 year or that 7 years is up, they might readjust and say, "Hey, rates are down, so we're going to give you a 4.2 unless you re-up at the 5 or the 6." Sometimes you see them at 6, 7. So when the market was really down, I saw them somewhere around 6, 6.5. That's a MIGA. It's guaranteed. Once again, it's just like a CD. If you talk about a SPIA, single premium immediate annuity, a lot of people use these with survivorship. So, like, let's say husband and wife have no kids, they don't want to leave their money to any kind of business or whatever. So what they'll say is, "Hey, I want the most amount of income as possible, and then whenever I die, there'll be a little step down. So let's say you get $100,000 a year of income. When I die, I want my survivor or my wife to get $80,000 a year. When she dies, all the money goes away. Insurance company keeps the money." That's really the only time it makes sense. The other time that SPIAs are used, a lot of people don't know this, is whenever let's say you get in a car wreck and you get a settlement. What they don't want to do is they don't want to give you the money, you blow it, and then you come back and sue them and say, "Hey, you didn't give us enough money." So what they do is they throw that, once again, we'll just use $1 million into a SPIA, and they'll guarantee you 5% income with a cost of living adjustment, or a COLA. So you'll get $50,000 the first year, 52,000 the next, 54 the next, and from there you never run out of money. So a lot of these settlement companies will say, "Hey, we'll settle your annuity." So what they'll do is they'll buy it from you for a reduced amount for 700 grand. "Hey, we'll give you 700 grand today. We'll buy your annuity." That company knows in 15 years they broke even, and now they're going to make money on that annuity as long as you live. Um, so that's the SPIA. The growth annuities, you could have FIA or a VA. We'll start with VA because they're kind of trash, variable annuities. Like, why have an annuity that's going to lock your money up for 10, 14 years if you're not just going to be in the market and get the full upside? To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The fees are super high, the expenses. Um, you're limited on what type of indexes you're in. Why would you do that? Why not just be directly in the market? And then you have FIAs, fixed indexed annuities, kind of like you said with the bumpers bowling. You're basically getting no downside risk in the market as long as you don't use a charge index. So most of the FIAs we use, almost all of them, have no charges. So as long as you keep the account for the time period, so let's say you do a 10-year FIA, you keep it for 10 years, there's no charges. If you keep it for 14 years, depending on the FIA, there's no charges. So 0%, the market crashes for 10 years straight, you'll still have your balance in your account. You do have a charge, a surrender charge, if you do cancel or liquidate that entire account in the first 10 years. So let's say 5 years in, you're like, hey, I need all this money. I don't care what the charge is. They'll charge you 6, 7%. But you get all your money. And of course, if there's any growth, you get taxed on it. If it's a 401k, you get hit with a 50% penalty. So like, you really don't want to drain these accounts anyway, because they're retirement accounts.
Mhm.
With that being said, on the FIA space, you know it a lot more than me. I'd call you the FIA king. If I was talking about IULs, I'd maybe say I know a little bit. But go ahead and talk on the different types of FIAs.
Maybe a bit. I'm gonna get you a shirt that says IUL King.
Hey.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll give you some generalities and then I'll give you some examples that I think might help some people. So, met with a lady, awesome lady who's 78 the other day, and she came to me and said, I just want to make sure that I can pay for my vet bills. Funny enough, because she has a bunch of animals, bunch of cats and dogs, which, I can relate to her on. So she said, I want to make sure that I have $1,800 a month for the rest of my life to take care of my vet bills, because she doesn't want to be in the market worrying about the ups and downs and worrying about when to take income. It's just too much stress for someone when they're older. They just want to know that they have income coming in and they don't have to think about it, whether the market's up, down, or sideways. So for her, we just said, all right, we need to cover $1,800 a month. Do you have any other concerns about leaving money behind? No. Okay. Do you have anyone else that you might potentially need this money? Like, do you have a spouse? Do you have kids that you want to make sure you leave this to? No. Okay. So you're telling me that you are the only person that needs this income. There's no one else. Yes. Okay. So if we have a scenario like that, that's when we would use one of the pension-like annuities where it's a very, very high income. Based on your age, it can be somewhere of 8 to 9% based on your age. So let's say you have $100,000, you could get $8,000 a year of income for that period of time for the rest of your life, or 9,000 based off your age. So that's what we were able to do with her, because all she needed was just income, didn't care about leaving money behind, didn't care about growth. So we used the pension-like style, guaranteed income, but you have a very high guaranteed income at the expense of the growth. You can't have everything. So that's one example. Second example is lady I met with yesterday. Great couple from New York. They wanted to make sure that they had an option to protect their money because the market's so high. They're very pessimistic on the market. So they were kind of looking at worst case scenarios and said, I want to make sure that I have some money that's protected, but I can also draw income off of for in the next, I think, 3 to 4 years when they retire, make sure they can take income and it's not locked up. So we use what's called, I would consider like a hybrid annuity, where it has some good growth capabilities and good income potential, but it doesn't have the best of either. It's kind of 50-50 on both. So for her, what we did is we basically said, hey, let's position part of your money that you have in the market into an annuity that's going to give you guaranteed income. It's going to give you some guaranteed growth, and you're not going to have to worry about where the market is. So for her, I just usually ask people, it's kind of a funny question. How much money of this, 1.5 million are you comfortable losing? None of it. Okay. Let's be real. Let's be realistic, because you're in the market. Like, you wouldn't have it there if you didn't want to lose money. I'll ask you again, how much do you feel comfortable losing in the next couple of years before the market goes down? 200,000. Okay, cool. So we want to make sure that we're positioning an appropriate amount into an annuity and not putting all of their money in, like you said, because there's a couple things you need to consider with an annuity. I give people the terrible analogy that if you go to Panera Bread, which I love, I love my coffee, love my mac and cheese, all that stuff. There's actually, funny enough, I think Sasan was the one who told me this first, and I just stole it. But how you go to Panera and you have the pick two, pick anything on the menu, you can only have two. Financial accounts are very similar. What I mean by that is you can either have growth, protection, or liquidity in your 401ks, brokerage accounts, anything like that. So let's look at her 401k because of her age. She has good growth potential because she's older than 60. She has full access because she's over 60, right? But she has no protection, meaning if the market goes down, she's going to lose probably a good chunk of money. So she has 2 out of 3 in the 401k. For an annuity, all that you're saying is growth and protection are more important than liquidity for that chunk of your money. That's what you're saying. So it's like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, this $700,000 that you're wanting to allocate to an annuity for guaranteed income, things like that. You have 10% access for the first 10 years if you need it. Are you telling me that you never foresee needing more than $70,000 out of this account? Yes. Okay, perfect. If that's the case, we have the right amount in the annuity, but if they need more access than that, that should never go into the annuity. So that's an example of, for them, they wanted to have an income, they wanted to have a good amount in the annuity, but we always want to make sure that if they do need emergency access with the 10% withdrawals, that they're not limited and they still have liquid money in their 401k that they can withdraw from if they need it. So that was an example of where we used a hybrid option. You're typically like 5 to 10 years away from retiring, want protection, want guarantees, but you're giving up a little bit of access, which most people are okay with because we still have money in the 401ks. And then the third one, which is probably our favorite, is just if you have a portfolio and we know we get to retirement, it's usually about 60-40 in terms of bonds and equities. You just take out the bonds, put an FIA in. As McKnight talks about, you can increase the rate of return while minimizing the standard deviation of the portfolio. So all that means in layman's terms is that we have more growth and we have more clarity of where the account's going to be at a given time because we don't have any wild swings in the market. And guess what we found is that when you have more clarity of where your money's at a given time, you have less deviation and even potentially going back to Roth conversions, maybe even potentially less taxes. People can sleep way better because they know exactly what the retirement picture is going to look like. So that goes back to just how can we help people in retirement better? We give them more certainty because if people are uncertain, they are worried, they're stressed, they're rolling over, waking up in the morning, looking at their phone. Is the market up, down? Did bombs go off somewhere today? Like that's the stuff they're worried about. But when you have increased certainty by using insurance and annuities, life insurance, all those different assets, that's the whole point. It's just giving you more certainty on income you can have, the taxes you're going to have to pay, and all those different things in the future.
So I got a couple questions wrote down here. And the first one I want to hit on because we hear this more often than not. I have a financial advisor. He's not going to like this. Let me go talk to him. And I have a pretty good idea of what you're going to say. Let me tell you what your advisor is going to say. Can you kind of give that spill?
Okay. So I got this. I've stolen every line, I think, from someone in our career. But I basically just tell people, hey, Dustin, let's role play. How does your financial advisor get paid?
I guess he gets paid off of how much money I have with him.
Okay. Yep. And do you know like exactly how much that is? Have you ever looked into that?
Nope.
No. Okay. I don't want to speak for him, but usually it's around 1.5% to 2% in terms of expense fees and management fees. So again, I go from the point of telling a story of a client I just met with. I just met with this guy. He actually worked for Campbell's, like the goldfish company. Awesome dude. He was retiring and he had his Ed Jones person that, guess what? He was wanting to retire, talk about annuities. He went to his Ed Jones person. First thing is his Ed Jones person was charging him 3% a year, which is a crazy fee. And the second thing is he went to him asking about annuities, and guess what type of annuity he pitched him? A variable annuity, right? So I go back to kind of our role play and the question of what would your advisor say is the way that your advisor makes money is by charging fees on the money they manage. So the thing that they're generally not going to do is, number one, they're generally never going to be okay with you taking money out of the market to put into different insurance products because they don't make their management fee on it anymore. Let me tell you how annuities work. You usually make 5 to 7%. So let's do the math. If they have a 3% management fee, they're basically taking 2 years of their income, putting it into an annuity if they make 6%, and they're giving up the right to make money on that for the rest of your life, which last I checked, you were going to live another 30 years, right? Yes. Okay. So again, back to my point, advisors are great, but they are a for-profit company that's trained by the institution they work for, that they have a specific list of things that they can market and do and not do. And if they do some of those prohibited things, they're actually fired. So what we find a lot of times is your advisor will never show you how to pay taxes now and take tax money out of the portfolio to turn it into after tax, because they take a 30% pay cut if you do that. Second thing is they probably won't ever show you annuity options. And if they do, they're not very good ones because they lose the management fee on it. So I'll just be like, hey, getting back to my main point, your advisor, do you feel like you would trust them to give you accurate information based off of the way that they're getting paid specifically for that? They're have some questions. So the thing that I always bring up too is I'm like, hey, obviously we get paid too. I'm not saying we run a charity, but what we usually find is that I will fulfill the client's needs as specifically what they're looking for. I try to eliminate my bias as much as possible because like we're doing well financially. I always try to not sell based off of my pocket, but based off of what someone wants. So like, I'll give you an example. That Campbell's guy, he even said, he's like, hey, should I do more in the annuity? I don't know. Let's run through that. Obviously we get paid more if he does more. Like, hey, I even tell people this. I'm like, hey, just so you know, we get paid based off of how much you do into the annuity. So I'm going to try to remove that from the equation, and let's look at what this is going to do for you and what it's not going to do. And then he's like, okay, well, if I do 400 instead of 300, my wife has a lot of medical bills and I might need some money in the next couple of years. So he's like, maybe I don't want that much in there. I'm like, perfect. Do 300. You're on the same page. So
That's awesome.
Going back to like what your advisor will tell you is they generally will not be a fan of annuities. And I just ask the client, cool, if your advisor tells you not to do this, what are you going to do then? Are you going to give up having guaranteed income in retirement, being less stressed? Are you going to go back to being stressed and worried about where the market's at just because your advisor tells you that that's what you should do?
So basically, you're telling me that 2 years of management fees is 6%. So if they do this annuity and make 6%, and you live for 30 years, they could have made 90%. So if you have $1 million in your portfolio, they could make 900,000 over the next 30 years, or make $6,000 once. Why would they do that?
Yep. And again, it goes back to that thing of captive companies. The way that they're trained is to make the agent, the agency, and the insurance company or institution the most amount of money. Obviously, we make money too. I'm not saying we don't, but that's why I have such a hard time with this industry, is because that's what dictates what people do. And that's why we like being independent, is because we don't have anyone who tells us what we can do. If we think something's best for a client, we're going to move that direction, not what the insurance company says. As you know, they have their own interests as well.
Well, real quick, if no one knows what it is, captive basically means exactly what it sounds like. You are captive. You can only sell the products of that company. So if we just talk about PNC or Home and Auto, let's talk about State Farm. State Farm only sells State Farm. So if you get a term policy, State Farm. You get a home and auto policy, State Farm. You get a pet policy, it's State Farm. Where if you're independent, I might have 50 carriers that I could use, and my pet policy versus State Farm may be $300 a month, but mine's $40 a month. You may get a term insurance policy from Primerica that costs you $150 a month, and I may be able to get the same policy, same benefits, same period for $40 a month. And it's really that much of a difference when it comes to costs. And on top of that, these captive agents make less. So let's say on a term policy, Primerica may make 50%. So let's say $100 a month, that's $1,200 a year. They may make $600 in a commission. Versus if you're independent, you get paid more. So let's say 100%. You'll make $1,200 on a $1,200 term, and you're giving a better product. So at the end of the day, personally, so don't take this to offense if you are a captive agent, the reason why you are a captive agent is because you're using someone else's name and brand to benefit you. If you are a Northwestern Mutual advisor, you're saying, look, here's Northwestern Mutual, the biggest company in the US. We work for them. Hey, I'm working for Primerica. We have this great 25% guaranteed blah, blah, blah in the IRA. They're using someone else's brand because they're afraid to step out on their own and build their own brand. That's me personally. So on the annuity side, one thing I've been having a lot of issues with, especially on social media, seeing these people run illustrations and not knowing that people like me can read the illustrations and understand them even that quick. Talk about a bonus annuity, when it makes sense and when it doesn't make sense. And I have a feeling you're going to say that it makes sense way less of time than it does.
Again, it goes back to, it depends. If anyone uses always or never, I really try to be careful of those words because they rarely are the case. And I'm a Star Wars fan, so only Sith.
Deal in absolutes.
I can't even say that. Only Siths deal in absolutes. What I find is where bonus annuities can be helpful is a lot of income annuities do have a bonus on the front end. That might not make them bad, but what it does sometimes, it can give you an increased benefit base, which if they want a guaranteed income for life can be helpful. So a bonus in that case can be helpful if they want the guaranteed income. But keep in mind, if they don't turn on the guaranteed income, it's actually not helpful at all, right?
Yep.
So that's where I find it not helpful. If you are just having accumulation annuity with a bonus on it and you're just taking withdrawals, the bonus is not free. So let's say it's a 13% bonus. Is there such thing as free money? We had economics class in high school. We know this, right? If someone brings free lunch in, someone paid for the lunch. It just wasn't you. So the bonus, if you have a 13% bonus, for example, which some carriers do, it usually is because the caps are lower. So they know that if they lower the caps by 2 to 3% on the bonus annuities to account for it on the front end, over a 10-year period, they're going to make their money plus some.
Right.
So where we usually find that bonus annuities fit is if you need a guaranteed income, that's totally fine. But the second thing is if you're trying to replace or what we call refinancing old annuities, because annuities are generally based off of where interest rates are when you start the contract. There is a little bit of fluctuation, but because interest rates are really high right now, like I ran into, example, American Equity annuity. I don't even know if we can say names, but I ran into annuity a while ago that was a 1.5% annual cap. 1.5% because it was written at a time when interest rates were like horrific. So there was there's no upside. So what we did is we're like, hey, this hasn't been growing very well. There is a surrender charge for getting out of the old annuity of about 7%. Are you okay if we use a bonus product, which might give you 11, 13% to cover the old surrender to get you into a contract that has higher caps to get rid of that 1.5% cap? So they were okay covering that surrender, having a 7% cap instead of like I think it was 8.5. But that's typically where we find it, is replacing or refinancing old annuities that are really low interest just because of when they were written.
Got it. Well, I know one thing I brought up at the beginning that I almost forgot was if you get a too good to be true illustration, what does that mean and how can they do that? How can a company come in and say, hey, we are going to beat the market by 7% or 20% per year?
Our favorite conversation. Basically, what happens is there's a lot of different indexes in these fixed index annuities that you can participate in. And what they do is they do a back testing, which all that means is they say, if you had this index for the last 20 or 10 years, let's say, this is what you would have made. You would have made 14% average, which if I went back over the last 10 years and picked something, I could find an index that did 600% because I could put my
NVIDIA.
I could make a Bitcoin index and like, hey, we got 600% growth and look all. So back testing is kind of what they do to say, hey, if you had used this index in the past, but the big caveat they don't tell you is past performance doesn't indicate future performance, obviously. So what happens is they use these indexes that look really good on paper, and they can also illustrate really high to the point sometimes we're seeing that they get a 20% average rate of return, which means that their money is doubling every 3 years, basically, right? So we see that a lot. If you see anything that's like 30% rate of return, 40%, or even worse, if you see 50s on the illustration, like per year, run for the hills, because that person, again, going back to what we said before, either is lying to you unintentionally because they are ignorant, which is not good, and you should not work with them, or lying to you on purpose, which is even worse. So what we usually find, again, going back to it, is your annuity is probably going to average 5, 6%, but you're not going to be seeing these crazy high rates of return because it's a bond replacement. It should not be an equity replacement.
Right. And I want to really reiterate something. I'm not saying a volatility control index or VCI is bad per se. The reason why is we've seen volatility control indexes do 10, 15, 20% a year. But you have to understand what a volatility control index is. What it is the bond price, or not the bond pricing, the options pricing on these are so much cheaper. So whenever it comes to, let's just say an FIA in the S&P 500, let's say that option cost $1. They can go buy that option, sell it, make a profit, give you whatever return up to a cap, and they keep whatever's above it. So let's say they have a JP Morgan Chase option, and that option costs 10 cents. So they can trade 10 times as much for how much the S&P costs, so they can actually give you a quote unquote better return if they do a good job. The thing is, what they don't tell you, and what 99% of these agents that are in my comment section DMs don't understand, Yes, it may have worked today, but tomorrow it may not work. Next year, they may drop the participation from 200% to 20%. They may drop or raise the spread from 1% to 10%. If you don't know what any of that means, it basically means if they introduce a new index and they say, hey, we'll give you 200% participation. So JP Morgan does 10%, they're going to let you participate 200%, so you get a 20% return. That's great, and it might actually work for 1 or 2 years. But what they will do is they'll reevaluate and say, "Hey, we're making too much money for the client, or like this is now the options are going up and they're costing more because we're doing so well. We have to drop that. So now the participation is 20%. So you earn 10%. Guess what? You get credited 2%. So as long as someone is actually paying attention to VCIs, they're watching the indexes, they're staying on the company's radar, getting the emails saying, hey, this index will drop the participation to 50%, the spread will be 8 instead of 2. If you're on top of that and you go back in and you change indexes every year with your annual reviews, don't stress about it too much. But what I'm saying is, why would you play the gambling game with something that is supposed to be volatility control and protected? So there was somebody I really trusted, went on a couple of their podcasts, and I set up a policy, an IUL policy, 7702, max funded, even term blended it. So I made it as cheap as possible. She went in and told my client that I did not have it in enough indexes. The S&P 500 was not good enough. There should be 20% in the S&P year to year. There should be a 20% in the month to month. There should be 20% in the fixed account. There should be 20% in 2 volatility control indexes. And she canceled my client's policy and replaced it. The good thing is I wrote it so well that there was no chargeback, because within 2 months everything was paid up and they were earning cash value. The negative is, all I'm trying to say is, people will go out there and try to one up. They'll always one up. I could always replace basically any policy, any FIA, anything. I could look at it and say, this is where it's wrong. Let's replace it with this. The problem is 90% of the time you could get away with what it is. So whenever someone comes in and says, hey, this is wrong, let's replace it for this, really make sure you understand why. Because there's a thing called churning business, to where you may write an FIA fish and it's doing well, has a high cap, 12%. All of a sudden that cap drops to 10%. Well, they'll come in and say, hey, your cap dropped 2%. Let's replace it with this bonus annuity. You get a 20% bonus, which means you'll get a 20% bonus minus your 11% surrender charge. So they'll sell you on all this beautiful, shiny objects. But what they don't tell you is everyone's caps drop by 2%. So really, you have to, one, trust your advisor, trust but verify. Two, just watch out for slime balls. So have you ever ran into anything like that before?
Yeah, I was, while you were talking, just looking at annual statements that people have sent me from the past of old annuities and stuff. One of the biggest things I see is, like you said, those big volatility control indexes, the rates can change quite a bit. So for example, I was looking at one, it's not horrific, but just an example. One changed from 110% last year to 90% this year, that's not a big difference. But if you saw one that went from 110 to like 30%, and then they introduce a spread, which means you have to make more than the spread to basically make money, that's when you start getting into dangerous water. So I don't see a lot of people doing it intentionally, of like, hey, let's go intentionally replace this business because your cap's dropped and you can make more money here. I hate to say it, but I sadly see people do this where they don't know they're doing it. Meaning they're like, hey, we could get you an uncapped strategy. But why did the person put you in a cap strategy? We could give you an uncapped one. They're like, okay, well, let's walk through that. What is the uncapped strategy? Oh, you get 140% participation in this index. Okay, what's the index? Oh, I don't know. Okay, do you think you want uncapped? If I could give you uncapped growth in the Hang Seng, like in the Chinese stock market, would you take that? You'd probably be like, no, I would not take that. So my point is, it depends on what you're participating in. Like if you have an 8% cap on average in the S&P, that's going to do really, really well over time compared to an uncapped strategy in some index that's not performing. So,
well, since I'm deep into the social media world, I'm going to go ahead and do another whistle blow. Look out for content like this. So there's this lady, she works for one of those 3-letter agencies. Her opening line, her hook for her video was, I made my client $2 million in 5 minutes. What did she mean? She was rolling over $10 million of an old IRA into a 20% bonus product. 10 million bucks, 20% bonus. I made my client $2 million in 5 minutes. She had hundreds of thousands of likes, tens of thousands of comments, and in that was comment FIA. If you're interested, 90% of those comments were FIAs. So that scares me because you're putting somebody into a 14-year contract with a 20-year bonus that they don't even need. And I think this person was in their 50s, which, whatever, 50s, 60s, 40s. But to roll that much money into a bonus product is insane. Once again, as Fish said, the only time a bonus really makes sense is at the end of your working years where you need that bump and you want the income, or two, replacing an old trashy product that's underperforming. So if someone dangles that carrot and says, look, I can get you $2 million tomorrow, run, please run, please run. That's all I have to say.
And let's go into that a bit more too, because a lot of people are like, well, like you're not telling the truth. Like there's more. So again, nothing's free. If you do the math on the bonuses, the bonus you can't even take out of the policy or get a benefit from unless you turn on the guaranteed income, which, to be honest, most people don't know this. They think, oh, you get 20% bonus for doing this. Most of the time, it's only on the benefit base. And what happens is if you have really high growth, a really high bonus, let's say it's 20%, again, the caps get lowered by about 2 to 3%, which might not be bad, but let's do the math. A 10% cap compared to an 8, that's 20% less. And if you do the math, I could show you guys spreadsheets on this, is you will make 20% less over that 10-year duration. So all it is they take the bonus and they say, hey, we're going to make it up on the back end. You cannot walk out with that money. You have a really high surrender, because if you have a 20% bonus and the commissions and stuff like that, I'll bet you that product probably has a 14% year one, which again, they don't go into any of this stuff either just because they don't really know, or they're not, they do know, and even worse. But that's what I find is they're like, hey, I made you 20 million, or I made you $2 million in 5 minutes. No, you didn't. The benefit base, which if you turn on income, gives you a 20% bonus on the income. It's
Right.
not.
So in 15 years, you have to turn on a 1% or 2% income-based charge to get your 20%. And if you never turn on the income, you lost that high-end cap just to say that I got this bonus that you never really got.
Which, by the way, again, if you unravel all the math and the fees and the bonuses and the income riders and all this type of stuff, if you're making 6%, that annuity probably has, let's say because I think I know what annuity it is, it's probably a 1.25% fee. So if, let's say you're making 6 on average, which is, you would be a god if you're making 6 in annuity average all the time, you're actually netting 4.5. And then let's say they drop the caps 5 years in, or something happens, and now you're stuck because now you have a very, very high surrender where it's another 10% they're going to whack you if you get out of the contract. So what I find is almost all of these annuities that we help refinance for people are big bonus ones that have a high fee, and they were put in some volatility control index because they were shown how much it performs. Oh, you're going to have 30%, 40%, all this stuff. You're going to beat the S&P. And then they get 5 years in, and what did that other client the other day say? My money hasn't done anything in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Let's unpack that, because it's not that annuities are bad. It's that let's understand why that actually happened, because it's not the annuity. It's actually the agent who wrote it didn't know what they were doing, because they put you in a bonus, which lowers the caps. They also put you in a product, or they also put you in an index that was not performing, that had a fee. So you're making 2% and you're getting charged 2%. So you're making no money for that 10-year period because they weren't doing their annual reviews with you, which they weren't. Otherwise, they would know, and they would stop selling these products, because we've done that. We've done that. We've done annual reviews and we're like, holy cow, this is not performing. We better fix this thing ASAP. So that just tells me that these people aren't doing annual reviews, is more of the story. But those people now come to us and are like, hey, can you help us? Oh, I don't want to do an annuity again. It's like, well, an annuity was not the problem. How about if we had something that had no fees, that had stable caps, that didn't change, in a product or in an index that actually performed? How much better off would you be versus like all the smoke and mirrors that people put up?
Yep. So moral of the story, 3 types of annuities. If you want guarantees, you can get 5 to 6% right now. Wherever you look, if you look at a B plus, C plus rated company, you might get like a 6 or a 7. They're basically just buying business. We just talked about that yesterday, I believe. Companies will give you crazy rate of returns and bonuses and roll-ups and all that to buy business, to go from a B plus rated company to an A minus rated company. That way they can sell more product. So they're basically taking a hit on their book to buy up their financial strength. You can do a income annuity or a single premium immediate annuity. And what that's going to do is going to lock in your money, give you guaranteed income. Maybe if you get a survivorship because you have a spouse, you do that. When you pass away, money goes to the insurance company. It is what it is. And then the FIA or the VA, which we talked about, VAs really never make sense, so I won't even go into that. And the FIA, you can either do the income option, you can do the growth option, or you can do a little bit of both. So, yeah, if you have any kind of old 401ks, 403bs, TSPs, you're getting to the point where you can retire. There's 457s and other accounts where you can retire before the age of 59 and a half. If you're at that point, you can retire. You can also utilize an FIA. And if that's something that you want to do, hit us up, see if we can help you out.